Welcome to Between Two Songs with Tim Jenkins, featuring music and conversation with some of Tim's favorite musicians.
Hello, welcome to the show, and our guest today is Alice Tung. Alice is a viola player and plays a lot of different styles of music, and I'm very glad she's here on today, and we're going to talk to her about music and just whatever happens to be on her mind today. Thank you, Alice.
You're welcome.
For being here.
It's fun to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. So tell me about when you started playing music and how you got into music.
Well, I started on piano. I was about 7 years old. I was dying to play piano. So my mom let me take lessons, and I loved it. I did very well. And in the public schools, actually, they offered violin. It was either violin or trumpet. So it was a hard debate, but I chose violin. Mm-hmm. And I just did really well at it. You know, all my piano background helped me with the violin, and I wasn't that great in school. I wasn't good at math or science, but I was good at violin, and that kind of made me feel good about myself, and got a little bit competitive, and I wanted to kind of beat out the other kids. So I played violin, and I took lessons probably about 7th grade. I started lessons, and then I think in 9th grade I went to a music camp, and there was one viola student, and the viola teacher was pretty sad. And I was just joking around with her. I said, well, if you get me a viola, I'll take some lessons. So the next day, she's like, I got you a viola. Where do you want to start? So I was like, oh, okay. And I tried it, and I just loved it. I love the sound so much more than the violin. It's a deeper, richer sound. Yeah. It's the alto voice of the string family. It's some people say it's a large violin, but and other people like to call it a small cello because it's tuned the same as a cello, but just an octave up, and we try to get that deep sound like a cello. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I love the viola. And when you're young, there's always a lot of violins. There's never enough violists.
Right.
So I was up in the first chair in the violas, and
Cool.
Yeah, I just loved it.
Cool.
Yeah.
How old are you when they give you that decision? Like between, you were talking about a decision you had to make between violin and trumpet. What age is that?
Oh, well, that was 5th grade.
Okay.
That was 5th grade. A lot of schools are starting 4th grade.
And did you start thinking about classical music right away?
Yeah, that's typically what
yeah.
you start with the classical, and you're trained that way. And
how did you find favorite music? When did you start to discover composers and performers that you really liked?
Well, my mother always had us listening to classical music growing up, so I kind of knew Beethoven and Brahms, and then as I progressed, I would listen to more and more violin concertos and classical music, whatever I was playing, and the youth orchestras I would listen to, and I would start getting to harder stuff like Tchaikovsky, different composers that were more advanced or more intricate. So the thing with violin has tons of repertoire, just tons, from the Baroque period up to modern music. The viola, we have some Baroque music, some concertos that are good, and then there's just nothing in the classical and romantic period. No concertos, no big concertos. There's some pieces, but concerto-wise, it goes from Stamitz, Hofmeister, and then to 20th century composers. William Walton, Bartók, Hindemith wrote a lot for viola. He was a violist. So we really jump this time period, and we get really into 20th century music.
What do you do in between?
You really don't play much in between.
Huh.
Or sometimes we take a little bit of the violin repertoire and we play it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so you really have to get an ear for 20th century music. And I've heard of some violists that they kind of go back to violin because they do dislike the repertoire for the viola. They preferred having all this great music for the violin.
Mm-hmm.
But if you like 20th century music, some atonal music, a little different than...
That's interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of composers. Once I got into music school, I went to Eastman for undergrad and then Peabody for my master's. A lot of the composers were writing great stuff for viola. They love that kind of dark, edgy, kind of gloomy sound of the viola compared to the bright violin. I think it fits well with the style of composers these days.
So you shuffled off to Eastman right after high school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What was that like?
Cold. It's in Rochester, New York, so it's very cold, but I loved it there. It was amazing. You don't realize how not good you are until you get into a conservatory and realize you're the bottom of the barrel, and you have to work really hard, and it can be difficult, but if you love the instrument, then it's good. If you go into it wanting to be the best, you're going to be disappointed because you realize there's always someone better than you. There's always someone working harder than you, but you go into it because you love it.
Yeah.
And that's what's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I like best about your playing, or one of the things, just coming from my perspective, and it might have something to do with what you were saying, the repertoire and having this idea about 20th century composition, is that you're really flexible. You can go in and out of styles, and if you're asked to just make noise or play atonally or play a texture, that's not something that's foreign or weird for you. You also are just really comfortable with odd meters and things like that in styles that are other than classical.
Yeah.
Like I noticed that about your playing right away. You're just very natural at these time signature changes and things like that. So I wonder how much has to do with the kind of getting into 20th century composition, maybe more than a violin player might.
Yeah, it does help. I mean, there's a lot of 20th century music for violin too. I think just learning the basics of classical music, the meters, it gives you all that background then to advance. So learning one genre really excels you to the next, and and then the 20th century music it's difficult. You have to really play a lot of it to hear the intervals, to understand it musically, and I think that's why a lot of new audiences they don't appreciate it, or they back away from it. But if you really kind of study it and start listening to more and more of it, they'll start understanding it more.
Who would you recommend for someone who backs away from more modern classical writing to introduce them to it? What's a good introduction?
Well, going to early 20th century, Bartók, Shostakovich, they're starting to get a little bit away from traditional classical and romantic styles. Trying to think of modern.
Well, you play music by a lot of modern composers. Like people will hire you, or ask you to play as part of a quartet, and you do that quite often. What are your experiences that way? What are as a viola player, as a musician, what are you excited about when a person brings a new composition to you to hear and to play and to look at for the first time? What would excite you about it compositionally? What are you listening for?
Our quartet just played a concert back in the spring for the Baltimore Composers Forum, so we got to hear tons of pieces. We actually got to choose the pieces, so we would listen to the maybe the MIDI recording on the computer and kind of pick from there. And you listen for structure, I guess, the moving lines, if it appeals to you, just your overall impression, kind of the sound of it. There's one that I liked the rhythm in it, so I was like, oh, let's do that one. Or it's not always atonal. I mean, there are composers these days that are writing melodies. So, I like that melody, that phrasing. So then we'd pick that one, or you kind of listen, get a feel for it. I don't know. Sometimes it's just like personal opinion, or.
But is it difficult to play music that you don't particularly enjoy? Does that happen where you guys are so good and people want you to make their music sound great, but you're so you're not completely committed to it?
There's definitely pieces that we'll play that we don't like, but you do your best to try to make it beautiful, to try and make the phrasing. We'll talk about, oh, hey, you could do this in your part, or bring that out, or we kind of help each other to make more sense of it, or make it more musical if we feel like maybe it's a little bit lacking. Kind of put our own ideas into it. I think composers really appreciate that, because sometimes all they have is their computer little recording.
It doesn't. Alive.
Yeah. But having real life people with their own interpretation, their own emotion, putting it into it, that can be. Or maybe they'll decide, hey, I don't like this either, or I could change this. Or sometimes we do tell them, hey, maybe you should do this. That would work a little bit better, or not to try to step on their toes, but maybe help them out a little bit.
Tell me about your quartet.
Our quartet, we're Azimuth String Quartet. Been together about 10 years, almost 10 years. We played more. We all have kids, and we're busy, so we don't maybe play as much as we used to. But we do try to put on some concert. We just played a concert at the Eastern Shore this weekend. And
cool. If you were to play tonight with a quartet, like if you had to do a performance, what would be some of the pieces you guys would play?
We love Beethoven, any string quartet. We just played an earlier one. We like all the standard stuff. Debussy, Ravel. We're dying to play some Shostakovich or Bartók, but we're not sure about the audience reactions. And it's very difficult music. So someday we'll...
Any Weezer?
No Weezer, not yet. I'm working on that.
Weezer's good.
Weezer's good.
Yeah.
I grew up with Weezer.
What do you think sort of a composer's role would be in society today, in America or in the world? It's not money. They're not going to make a ton of money, but what kind of role might they have?
I think a lot of them, they write music for TV, or I think the video game industry always needs.
But I mean, somebody sitting lonely in his room with pencil and paper. That guy or that girl.
They can join these things like composers forums, and they can submit their music, and hopefully have live people play it. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, this is tough.
Yeah, it is tough.
And lastly, talk, if you could, about your faith and also what you think that has to do with playing music. You know, we're taught we're supposed to play for the glory of God,
Yeah.
which is like a nice thought. But when
Sure.
you're playing, you're thinking about 50 other things or
Sure.
worried about them. So talk about that a little
Sure.
bit.
Well, I remember being back at Eastman. There was a point where I felt like playing music was kind of selfish. I was really kind of torn. I spent all these hours in the practice room. Maybe I should be out there. I always had the desire to be a nun and go out and help people with Mother Teresa. But then a few years later, I actually started playing in nursing homes. And, just for the church service. And I would see these people and they would be crying. I mean, these people that are kind of a little bit forgotten. And I realized, wow, I can really touch people with my music. Again, church service, sometimes I would just go play at Thanksgiving, stroll around, and, they really appreciate it. So then I realized, it didn't have to be selfish. I do work, all these hours to play so I can play well, so I can play for others. Mm-hmm. So I do enjoy nursing homes. Playing at church is great. I play at our local church a lot.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a nice story, definitely. All right, one more question, and then I'll let you get out of here. On a scale of 1 to 10, how proficient are you with the chainsaw?
The chainsaw. Well, I don't get near gasoline powered.
I don't do that
I'm
either.
just worried they're gonna take my hand off or my face. It's kind of neat. But with electric chainsaw, I'm pretty good.
Yeah?
I'm pretty good. Maybe a 8.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe
wow.
8. Oh,
that's not bad.
I don't know.
All right. Well, cool. All right. Well, I thank you so much, Alice. I really enjoyed talking with you. You're a wonderful, wonderful musician. And you can look in the description box. You'll find out maybe some things about Alice and her presence online and her quartets and where she plays and these kinds of things. And that'll do it. So thank you very much.